I suppose for reviewing the session, and then to feedback to yourselves a copy of the recording. Just it saves people taking notes and stuff like that. And we'll also send out a copy of the slides to everybody who participates. So without further ado, my name's John Kern, and I'm part of the team that delivers Donegal Volunteer Centre. And we're delighted to be able to, I suppose, chat to you as part of Social Inclusion Week, and hopefully give you some insights into a bit of research and a bit of kind of thinking that we've done around this topic of getting volunteers, I suppose, comfortable to come back into the fold after the COVID-19 period. So if it's okay, I'm just going to share screen and we'll get started into it. So as I said, this, I suppose, very much is a pilot for us as well. We would have kind of developed this, but you're the guinea pig group for us delivering this this particular talk. So you might have to bear with us a little bit. So the Back to Volunteering itself, yeah, so it's just about supporting volunteers to return, as we've said. So just a little bit about Zoom. So just if I can ask everybody to mute themselves while you're not talking, just it saves there being any interference for anybody across the kind of the call and the video chat. Should you drop out, or should I drop out, or should the internet decide to fall away on us, just reconnect and we'll take it from there. So just if you do get lost somewhere, just come back to us. We're going to be recording this session, as I said, for attendance. If I could ask you all just to stick your name and your organization into the chat if possible, just so we have that. And I'm not sure if we'll need breakout rooms or not, but if we do, we'll deal with that as we get to it. Okay, so about Donegal Volunteer Centre, I know that I suppose I'm familiar with most of you, and hopefully you're familiar with the service myself and Eamon provide. But just to give you, I suppose, a refresher, maybe after 18 months of not being connected with us all that much, just to give you a little bit of a flavour and a bit of detail about ourselves. So there's 2 core staff in the Volunteer Centre, and we're supplemented then by a couple of other people who come in and help out with different projects. Our approach is very much county-wide. We take a very strong focus on outreach. So we try to be within 20 minutes of everybody in the county once a month. Well, in normal times we would be, but even now as we're starting to reopen, we do our best to be out and about and trying to kind of connect with groups and volunteers as we go. We are very much partnership focused. So we focus on, I suppose, supplementing our services to work with other people and other groups to help achieve more for volunteers and for groups across the county. I'm just going to keep admitting people as they come in there. And we try to have positive and responsive options, I suppose, is the phrase that we would use. So we try to help people, whatever the challenge is they're coming to us with addressing that, and we try to be as responsive as we can. Now, I'm not claiming at any level that we're perfect at any of this, but we do our best. And we found ourselves, I suppose, over this past period using the phrase that we help people find their community. So that's, I suppose, the service that we offer for our volunteers, and that is as much a physical community as an online community, as an issue-based community. So, whatever, I suppose, people are interested in, or whatever it is that their own ambitions are, we try to connect them with that community that will be able to help them achieve those ends. And there's somebody very keen to get us on the landline here, but unfortunately we're in Zoom, so they can't do that. So I suppose the talk itself here today is around that topic of getting back to volunteering. So I'm going to give you an overview of a survey that we completed as part of our, I suppose, a research is probably a grand term, but as part of a project that we did over the summer, where we reached out to a lot of volunteers just to ask them what their concerns were, how they were kind of getting on. And we looked at it from 2 aspects. We looked at kind of management volunteers or leader volunteers, and we looked at normal volunteers that come in to just help out with projects and stuff like that. So we'll chat you through that. I'm going to talk a little bit about volunteers and vaccination, because I know it's a topic of interest to a lot of people. We're going to talk about how the Volunteer Centre can help, just to refresh you on our services and what we can do to help you, I suppose, as you're reopening, and then a little bit about question and answers. But look, equally, as we're talking here and as we're going through things, if there is a question, just unmute and ask. Hopefully I'll know the answer, and if I don't, sure, somebody in the audience might, or we'll find out the answer as we go through. So I suppose we're looking at this period as the grand reopening. I've seen the described in newspapers as the grand resignation, where people are kind of giving up jobs and making different decisions and lifestyle choices for themselves. But we're looking at it, I suppose, within that community sector of, it's an opportunity maybe to relook and look at what it is that groups are doing. There's never really been that period before where groups were closed for a while. It was always kind of that treadmill where it was just ongoing and ongoing. So, this is maybe an interesting time to be able to look at what volunteer roles, what deliveries, what projects, and what other services are being offered by community groups across Donegal. So, the research itself. So what we decided to do, I suppose we were talking within our own community here, or within our own volunteer centre and within our network of volunteer centres, just about this question of people being nervous to come back. And we had some anecdotal evidence of it. We had some kind of, stories that were coming out of people being nervous, but equally we had stories of people, dying to get back and not any level of nerves at all. So we decided that we would kind of do some work ourselves as volunteer centres, come together to look at the topic, figure out how we were going to kind of progress it and how we were going to work through that. So we issued a survey to volunteers that were active kind of across the border region effectively, prior to the pandemic. So we kind of selected in on volunteers that were out and were doing stuff, that were kind of out in the community working over that kind of pre-pandemic period. We focused the questions on two different people, like we'd said, so on the leaders and on the general volunteers. We've analysed the results, and we analysed, I suppose, the supports they were getting from the groups themselves. And then, we kind of looked at what it is that they would need to get active and to make them comfortable to come back in and do their volunteering again. So we had 276 responses, which isn't bad. It's kind of a large enough number for us to be able to say that it's a meaningful sample of the volunteers that we had active and operational across the region. And just to give you an idea, I suppose, of who those 276 people were. So 20% of them had a leadership role. So 20% of them were probably effectively like yourselves, people that were leading community groups or community services. 40% of them were weekly volunteers, 30% occasionally volunteered, and 30% not regular volunteers. And we would kind of define that ourselves as, those are the people who will turn up to help at events and will turn up when there's something big on, but aren't interested in maybe going to the committee meetings and going to those kind of sessions and services. So out of that, I suppose we asked the volunteers in a leadership role particular questions. So we asked them, will you return to your role? Are you interested in going back? 70% fantastically, which shows, I think, that community spirit piece, said that they would return to the role that they had within leading that organization. 10% may return but had concerns, and then 20% in that kind of sphere of, we've done our time and it's time for us to move on, or they had those other concerns. But we also asked them, have you spoken to your volunteers about returning? Have you reached out to them and said, look, this is us, we're starting to reopen our service. We're going to be working through various issues and topics and concerns. Are you interested in coming back to us? And we found that less than half had made that initial contact. 20% of them said they planned to do it, but I think a lot of them were prompted by the question that we asked them. And another just over 20% had said that they just expected the volunteers to show up. And maybe that's, I suppose, it's reflective maybe of that kind of an older school sort of attitude of sure, I'm here, of course they'll turn up whenever we say we're open again. And, unfortunately, I suppose, if of what we've learned across the pandemic, you know, that people have to make maybe health choices for themselves, and they have to make maybe more considered choices than they would have before. And while people maybe are willing to help and interested in helping, they have those kind of underlying concerns that need to be addressed. So then I suppose within that, for the volunteers in the leadership role, we additionally ask them what their concerns are about volunteers returning. So that's just people like yourselves. So 30, it's roughly a third, and a third. So we'll go with that, you know, that they may not wish to return. So there was an underlying concern there and a recognition of the fact that people might not want to come back into that arena again and might not want to participate. A third were concerned about how we can keep them safe. You know, this, I suppose, look, if we look at what we picture in our head as a traditional volunteer, we're looking at, you know, an older demographic maybe of those people that were active in the community in those roles. And I suppose they were told to stay home and keep safe for that year or 18 months. So there's now a concern that, you know, we're able to keep people safe as they come back out and kind of re-emerge into their volunteering roles again. Will they be COVID-19 compliant? So I think we all have that concern, and I noticed it even here. I don't know, some of you will know where the volunteer centre is based. We're above Tobin's petrol station in Letterkenny, and Tobin's, well, actually we should call it Tobin's sandwich shop that happens to sell a bit of petrol, I think, if we were being more honest. But we were down there yesterday or the day before, and somebody came in without a mask, queued up for a sandwich. When they got to the point of ordering a sandwich, the staff informed them that if they weren't willing to put on a mask, they weren't going to serve them. And this person kicked up an awful fuss. But the staff were confident in the fact that they had been told, you know, this is the line of management, this is the Tobin's decision, and they would be supported in that fact. So they were able to kind of get that and have that strength within themselves to say, no, this is the operation, and this is the rule within our facility, and this is what's going to happen. And I think for groups, I suppose, coming back, it's important to take a clear line on those sort of things, and, you know, and do that and enforce it, because we all kind of, where we all see a crack in the armor, we all try to drive through, you know, we all kind of become maybe a little bit more kind of complacent, and we may not necessarily focus in on the things that we need to. So, you know, while there is a COVID issue, and I think the COVID issue is going to go on an awful lot longer than October 22nd, it's important that people are compliant, and that the leaders within organizations are maintaining that compliance and enforcing that compliance. So, motivation to return. So this was, I suppose, back to the more general volunteers. So this is kind of the people that are helping out with the bingo, not calling the bingo, I suppose. So it's looking at, you know, if you're going back, what are you most looking forward to? So this was just, this survey seemed to us, as we were developing it, to be kind of a course of misery. Because it was, you know, are you hesitant about going back? Are you this? Are you that? And it was a very negative sort of thing. So we decided we would inject a bit of hope into it. So we asked the question around, you know, if you are going back, what are you most looking forward to? So, you know, to give people maybe start them thinking about that sort of return to their volunteering role. Keeping busy, came in with 38%, over 40% for meeting the other volunteers. And we find that reflected in our work here in the Volunteer Centre. We ask everybody who comes in to register to volunteer, you know, why do you want to volunteer? What is it that you're going to do out of this? And we find invariably that people want, you know, to increase their social circle. They want to make friends. They want to kind of do that, sort of that social aspect of it is what's really important to them. And that they equally want to kind of keep themselves busy and keep themselves engaged in the community. And interestingly, we were doing a talk earlier on today, and I had to do some kind of research and statistics around the mental health benefits for our volunteers. And one of the other questions that we kind of researched was around the friendships that volunteers have accessed as part of their volunteering. So we do a survey every year of our kind of active volunteers, and we ask them a range of questions, but one of them is, you know, do you feel that your range of friendships has increased by participating in volunteering. And 64% of last year's respondents, and if we consider that that was kind of a COVID year, but 64% of those respondents have come back and said, yes, our my friendship circles have increased, my social interaction has increased as a result of my volunteering. Equally, then we ask a question around kind of mental health and supports and or mental health and well-being, and do people feel that it has improved? And more than 70% come back to say yes, that they have benefited, their mental health and feeling of well-being or sense of well-being has benefited from their volunteering work. So it shows you the importance of those things, and that is very reflective of this. So another 30% came back saying, meeting the clients and meeting the service providers, and you would have possibly hoped that it was more than that, but maybe they don't all look forward to meeting clients. And then we had 66% coming back to say, look, providing the service, that is the thing that is important to me. And now the eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that I add up to more than 100% here. It was a multiple choice question, so you could pick a few headings, but that just gives you a flavor of what it is people want when they're coming back. And maybe if you're talking to your volunteers, you could be couching the conversation in those terms. Sure, it would be great, you'll get back, you'll get to spend time with the other volunteers that you were partnered with, spend time with the clients, and sure, we couldn't run the service without you. Those sort of things. So, and this one, I suppose, we put in as a very stark question: are you concerned about being safe from COVID-9 rather than 19? I'm like your man who thought there was 18 previous COVIDs now. So yeah, COVID-19 while volunteering. And we put that up, just the bar chart, because it's pretty much 50-50, of people concerned and people not concerned. Now, you'd wonder, are some people overcautious and some people possibly foolhardy? I think there's a safe middle there that we all need to be in, where there is an element of concern, because look, the numbers are relatively high, hospitalizations are relatively high, but on the other hand, we have the vaccination program and we have the safeties and the protocols in place. But it's just, I suppose, to alert you to the fact that if you meet with 10 volunteers that are coming into your service, chances are 5 of them are concerned about returning, and the other 5 are possibly a little bit gung-ho. So the concerns about returning. So this was also a multiple choice where you could come in, you could pick a few options. So a third of them came in and said they didn't know what their organization's plans were, which is a concern for organizations, that the volunteers who you are going to have coming in to provide your service just aren't sure about what it is that's happening or what it is that's going to be that you're going to be delivering. 20% were concerned about the building. Like, we've all been jammed in the back of old community halls and offices where you just kept pushing people in until there was no more room. And unfortunately, I suppose that's not where we are anymore. So we need to have those physical concerns, I suppose, in the back of our head. Lack of PPE and, I suppose, appropriate use of PPE was a concern. Cleaning procedures. I know within our own offices here, there's an awful lot more cleaning going on than there ever was before. But March to May 2020. You couldn't stand up without somebody wiping your chair down, because we were all really nervous of everything. So, there was an incessant sort of cleaning. So, but it's important, I suppose, that not only are there cleaning procedures, but they're seen to be as well, and they're overtly seen to be. Dealing with high-risk clients, and I think this is a concern. A lot of the community services that are out there have evolved and been devised and have come about and are funded to deal with maybe the more vulnerable in society. And I suppose there's a concern there that people have around, I suppose, interacting with those clients and possibly, bringing the virus to them or bringing an illness to them. Or equally, I suppose, if you're dealing, on the opposite end of the spectrum, if the clients themselves maybe live a lifestyle that wouldn't be conducive to them taking those COVID-19 precautions, that you may be concerned as a volunteer coming forward. Having to enforce COVID-19 restrictions was a concern for a third. And that is, that's the situation I was talking about downstairs in the cafe, where people just felt that they were kind of that they would have to be telling people to go and put on masks or telling people to sanitize. But I think it's important that it's clearly led by whoever's in charge, that this is the protocol. And when things are open a little while again, if that protocol is relatively strictly adhered to, then that will just become the standard. Many years ago, I suppose you walked out of the house, and you made sure you had a wallet and a set of keys with you. Over this past 10 years, we've added a phone into the mix of that. We've probably subtracted cigarettes from that mix. And but now we've added in a mask. There's nobody now who doesn't have a mask sitting in their car, doesn't probably have a few. There's actually 2 or 3 sitting in and around my desk here, because we're dealing with the public in and out. And it's just having that and enforcing it. 20% had no COVID concerns. They were happy to go. And then we had other smaller concerns. And just, I suppose, to give you a flavor of those. So we had a concern with people over reconnecting. And I think that's a very legitimate one. I think we've all been in a very small bubble for maybe 18 months. Even if we were interacting with people, it was like this. I couldn't imagine, 2 years ago, if we had been having a session like this, we would have invited you all to the volunteer centre and crammed you into a meeting room. We would have stood up the top, would have been, there'd have been tea passed around, there wouldn't have been the sense of kind of space and sense of personal space that we do have now. But that has created its own problem. It's created mental health difficulties. It's created anxiety. It's created kind of social isolation for people. And there's a lot of people that will really struggle to readjust to coming back out, and will find it difficult to reconnect with kind of services and with people that they would have been involved with before. Family issues, that is people, I suppose, maybe that have caring responsibilities or have concerns about being out volunteering, and and maybe taking something home with them. Family responsibilities, I suppose, look, we've all evolved over this past 18 months. We got used to maybe spending more time at home. We've maybe taking on additional responsibilities there. And, that's a concern for people now, re-emerging back out into the volunteering landscape. Mental health issues, I've touched on that briefly, but it's a real valid concern. And we're seeing more and more that the mental health implications of COVID-19 are going to be massive. I was chatting to a group recently that run a counselling service. Pre-COVID-19, they would have had their counsellor 1 day a week in their facility, and it was aimed at very particular cohorts of the community. There was a lot of support around bereavement. There was support around kind of long-term illness and stuff like that. They're now up to 2 days a week of counselling. They could go to 3 if the counsellor wasn't booked out solid everywhere else. And they're finding that there's an awful lot of teenagers coming in, an awful lot of young people who are just really struggling with that anxiety piece of getting themselves back out and getting themselves kind of active in the community again, and dealing with that kind of fear of COVID. And I've seen it myself in my own family. I have 2 young daughters. We took them into a shop a few months ago, into Asda or Tesco or one of those kind of bigger shops, and they were nervous to touch anything. And that's not something any of us should ever really be thinking about, but it's something that's there, and something that we will, as parents, will have to work on. But as a wider community, it's definitely something that we're going to have to work on, about getting people to feel comfortable being reconnected with each other, getting people to feel comfortable about being in crowds, about asking for help and asking for services. We've heard stories of people who, were ill over this past 18 months who didn't go looking for help because the hospital was already busy enough with COVID, or they were concerned about their issue not being as serious as COVID. And all of those things are now falling out. So it's just something that we need to be very conscious of, is that mental health piece. Motivation to keep going. I suppose it's like everything, I know myself, you go away for a week's holidays out of the office, and the first morning you get up to come back to it, you're kind of going, why didn't I take a fortnight off? Or generally for me during summer holidays is, why didn't I become a teacher out of 3 months off, and that sort of thing. And we all suffer from that motivation piece, and we all find it difficult to get remotivated. But I suppose if what you're getting into is volunteering and it's something you should enjoy, something you should kind of get personal satisfaction out of, and you should feel that you're contributing. If your motivation is struggling in that initial stages of getting back out there, well, it's definitely going to struggle. And it's something that as groups and as community leaders that we have to be aware of, that we're kind of able to give people maybe that injection of good spirit and that injection of motivation as they're showing willing, or as they're kind of they're coming forward to support our services. So we equally then we asked lots of questions, as I'm sure you are seeing. We asked as well about, rating the supports that would encourage you to return. So what is it that, groups could do to help you kind of get yourself back to volunteering and get yourself back out there? So we asked them to rate them. So as they've ranked them, 1 to 6 is how they're showing here. So good COVID-19 safety precautions, PPE, numbers, restricting numbers, cleaning, making sure that these things are adhered to. That came out as number 1, and that makes sense because that's a physical thing that you can see and that you can touch. Second was a phone call or a meeting to discuss the concerns about returning prior to them making a decision to return. So that's that, just check in. And I know that some services have been really good with doing it. And I suppose we have Emma from Alone here, and Alone really specialized in that check-in right over the entire COVID period, where you were getting in touch with thousands upon thousands of people every week, just to check in with them, see how they were, and to kind of keep them motivated and give them something to be looking forward to. But it's just really important that we look at that for our volunteers as a way to just, make sure, gauge their interest, allay their fears, and help them make that positive decision to return. Third was, to get access to like a video. And it's relatively straightforward. You WhatsApp somebody, or you even record a video and send it out to people to say, look, when you come back to the community centre, or when you come back to our facility, things are going to be different, but here's a walkthrough of how it works. There's now a perspex barriered reception. You're going to be asked to bring in your own cup. You're going to have limited numbers in the meeting rooms. You're going to have hand sanitizer stations. There's going to be a mask requirement, whatever the case may be. And I know for ourselves coming into our office here, we now have plastic screens in our meeting room. And every time somebody comes in, I welcome them to the prison meeting room or prison visiting room, because it feels like you're chatting to somebody through perspex. But it's the nature of where we're at for the moment, and it's something that we have to deal with. But it's important, I suppose, that people know what they're coming into, that they're not kind of accosted by those things whenever they get to the door after returning to a place that meant so much to them, and to a service or a facility that meant an awful lot to them over the years they were volunteering. So a safe way to meet and socialize with other volunteers and staff. So I suppose we're not going to have the event anymore where, we have a birthday cake and you blow out the candles and then somebody cuts it up and sure you just keep passing the slices down on paper plates until we run out. We're going to have to be more considered, I suppose, in how we do that socialization piece, how we do those fun elements that people really enjoy and that people value. And I suppose it's about us planning to do that and letting the volunteers very visibly know that we have a plan and a procedure in place as to how we're going to do that. The fifth one then was a change of role or more flexible hours. So, I suppose people have gotten used to being maybe accommodated by flexible work practices, maybe volunteering from home. So they don't necessarily have to be going physically into the centre, or physically into a building, or physically into an office to deliver that service. Being able to do their role, but maybe in a slightly changed way. And then the sixth one was the choice to remain a virtual volunteer. And I suppose, Emma, this may be something that Alone has looked at, with your befrienders or the telephone service. I know people were doing it from home over the COVID period. Maybe it's something that you would be looking to continue to do as you go forward, and just giving people the opportunity to still engage, still volunteer, still deliver what it is they're interested in delivering, but without necessarily having to physically be located in any particular place. So I'm going to stop talking now for a few minutes, if that's okay, and just get a sense of, I suppose, what you maybe have done yourselves, or what thoughts you might have around getting volunteers to return. And Emma, I might start with yourself. I'm going to stop sharing for the moment, just to, I suppose, what it is that Alone have done, around that kind of befriending service and the telephone service.
Yeah, I suppose, well, with the telephone service, we always had like a good morning call as such, that was operating. But once COVID hit, all our befriending visits, the one-to-one visits, all had to change, like literally overnight. We had to phone every volunteer and say they can't happen. So a lot of those did go to phone-based. Then the volunteer would keep in touch weekly, or in some cases they were going out but not going into the home, but maybe helping with shopping or something. What we're finding at the moment is we've some volunteers that were dying, as you said, dying to get back out visiting. John couldn't wait once they got the go ahead and the guidelines around home visits again, couldn't wait to get out. And then others that are much more cautious, and some that have decided that they'd rather keep it at telephone, and maybe for another volunteer to replace them on visits, and that's just due to their I suppose comfort levels at the moment. As you said, a lot of other family responsibilities are thinking of other members of their family, and maybe don't necessarily want to be doing home visits. And I think a lot of concern about bringing something to an older person, that they don't want to be the person that may bring something. So I think that's a big fear for people. So I suppose at the moment it's really us talking to the volunteers about that and seeing where they're at. I know you have a slide coming up just around volunteers and vaccination, and I'll be very interested in that, because I know in relation to being an employer, you can't ask, and sometimes it is tricky for us, whereas, the older person themselves or a family member may want to know about a volunteer, but then where is the line, in relation to that. But yeah, phone-based worked great for us. We've definitely had some volunteers as well that have done the virtual, that have, done the FaceTime or got their older person set up on calls as well, on FaceTime calls and stuff like that, which has worked well.
Very good. No, that's fantastic. It's a mix of all those things. Sheila Ifari down in Maharorty, I'm going to ask you next, because I'm aware just that you run the youth club there and you have a lot of activities and classes. How have you gotten people back into the service? You're muted there, Sheila. Yeah, thank you.
We're only just starting to get people back in, John. We haven't got any volunteers in as such. Yeah. We've started back a few of the groups, and I think with the social distancing, like yourself, we have a few of the screens that if they feel that there are too many people in the room, that we started off with the women's group first, and they came back. They're coming back gradually, a few more every week. And we have the tables well spaced. We're able to leave the 2 meters between each person, whereas before there'd be 2 people kind of topping and tailing on a table. If they were sitting with sewing machines and that, now there's a table for every person. If tables are too close together, we have the screens up in between. The fogger is coming out when they're gone, and everything has been sanitised after they leave. The windows are open and doors are open, which with older people is a bit of a hindrance at the moment, and it might put some of them off as the weather gets colder. But we're just going to have to deal with that when it comes. Yeah. We're looking at at the moment, I'd say we were at maximum. This week we had 14 in, and that was the room was pretty much it. The room wasn't packed, but with social distancing we couldn't fit any more in. So if any more comes now, we're going to have to start looking at moving out to the sports hall. But it's the cleaning regime. It's making sure everything's cleaned down before they come in, cleaned down. The room is left for a wee while after they go. We haven't got the youth clubs back because we were kind of went with the guidelines from Oigan the Gaeltarte and Donegal Youth Service, and they'd advised us, because of the restrictions and because of how everything's going to go, with the kids according with the restrictions, they were looking for the under 12s to be wearing masks and the older ones to be vaccinated. We'd have the parents coming in on supervision duties, so we don't know where we stand with, are we allowed to ask them if they're vaccinated? I suppose not all of them would agree with the masks either. So we're still waiting. We're looking at opening up after Halloween when the restrictions have lifted, because it'll give us a wee bit more freedom, even though we are still going to be very strict with the cleaning and things like that.
Yeah.
We have a Halloween bash here every year, where the kids come in, they have a disco, they're running around playing, and you know yourself, the smaller children have no interest in disco dancing. And then we do the fancy dress parade, and then when the judges go out then to make up their decisions, the kids then, the disco, the music comes back on, and some of the older teenage volunteers would go out dancing with them and try and get them to do, you know, the different dance routines and things. We're doing it this year, but it's going to be totally different. It's going to be table service. The families are coming in and they'll be sitting at tables within their own family group.
Yeah.
We're going to have a magician at the start. We'll do the fancy dress parade when everybody's in, and then when they go off to make up the mind who the winners are and things, we are going to have we have activity books made up, and we're going to have refreshments and things, and a cup of tea for the parents, and wee goodie bags for the kids to keep them seated at the tables. So we're restricted in numbers that we can have in. Mm-hmm. We'll probably lose maybe half of what we would normally have, about 120 kids. This year, I'd say we have max, we'd probably be able to take about 80. Yeah. So, you know, but we are going to try our best and make it as safe as we can.
No, it's interesting, Sheila, and I have an 11-year-old at home who's waiting hard for you to reopen that youth club. That's why I was asking. But anyway,
well, the older ones, yeah. Well, why haven't you sent in your email to get your application form?
Oh, I'll need to check this out. But
we're hoping now, even if we can't, we're stuck with volunteers for Creastry for the older youth club. Yeah. So we're not sure yet where we're going with that. So it might be for the first couple of weeks that it'll just be the drop-in centre that's opened. They won't have access to the whole hall until we find out how things are going forward. But we're hoping.
I think all of those things are all, you know, they're all going to be worked out over the next period. But I suppose our thing here today is just to chat you through some options and kind of different approaches to take to recruit those volunteers or get those volunteers back in. I don't want to keep picking on people. So if there's anybody else who wants to unmute and, you know, would say about how I suppose you have looked to get volunteers back, or if there's any kind of additional thoughts that you would have around ways to help with volunteers returning. He's Kevin, good man.
Yeah, we've basically in Buncrana, we've apart from an incident where we had to close because there were a couple of members of staff. One of the members of staff got COVID, and then they were working closely together, so we had to close just for a very short period of time. But we've stayed open, but we haven't been open to volunteers. The volunteers have only come in out of necessity, mm-hmm. and it's given the imminence of the 22nd of October, which may or may not happen according to the news now, but it's a very real concern for us. But to an extent, I think it's dangerous to assume that most volunteers will be content to return. And to an extent, we have done that. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, I dearly want to get back into the credit union and have physical face-to-face meetings where I can chat to people, give friends a hug, and so on and so forth. That's just that's my personal views, and that's a dangerous assumption. And I think because everybody isn't like me and everybody doesn't feel the same way as me. So what we have decided to do is to try and reach out belatedly to engage with our existing volunteers and any potential volunteers that you or others might manage to refer our way, to see what concerns they have. And we're planning to have a hybrid meetings, hybrid working sessions, where those people who are comfortable about coming into a meeting can do so up to certain maxima, as Sheila and Emma were saying. But those who are not comfortable about coming in can tune in by Zoom or anything else. Now, that's just, those are simply our plans. We've really only had 2 sessions back in the boardroom. The boardroom would normally have held about 13 of a board and about up to 20 people in total. But now with social distancing, it can only hold 6 or 7 people comfortably. But we've invested heavily in our IT to now to connect the other 4 branch offices. So that's what we're trying to do. To adopt an approach where people can choose whether to come in or tune in.
Mm-hmm. But that's a very sensible approach, Kevin, and that it gives that level of comfort that, you know, you can see how it goes for Kevin and his ilk in the meeting, and, you know, and get that level of comfort, and you get a sense of, you know, it is safe to come back and that understanding. So no, that's very interesting, and it's an interesting approach. And, you know, I suppose it is, technology is going to allow us to do that, to have those joint sessions where you can physically be there and virtually be there as well at the same time. So thank you very much. Unless there's anybody else to come in, I will go back just and give you some of the ideas that we've had around how, I suppose, we think that this sort of thing will work. So just to take you through here, and I'll make sure now it's warning me that you can see my screen now, but that's okay. So possible ideas to action, I suppose, is what we call this. It's about, you know, contacting volunteers. And the real thing there is, you know, checking in with them, letting them know they haven't been forgotten, what supports are available, what you've changed, and primarily that they've been missed. You know, that, God, you know, we haven't seen you in ages. Sure, wouldn't it be great to get back in? And, you know, we're looking forward to having that coffee. To show them what COVID-19 actions have been undertaken. And that's that, you know, that quick video just showing through, when you come in to volunteer, this is how the place is now going to look. And it removes that first day nerves, maybe. You know, there's a reason why when we were all starting secondary school, we got to go down in a day when it was quiet and walk around it. You know, it kind of creates that sense of comfort for whenever you're coming back. Being overt with PPE and cleaning, you know, detailing the changes to work routine for people, how it's going to work, and highlighting to them, you know, what will be the same and what will be different. So, you know, what changes are being put in place, but that, you know, the value, the customer, the connection, the clients, the fun, the enjoyment, all of those things, which are the reason why they do it, will all still be injected into the service and into the volunteering that they do. You know, when meeting volunteers, it's about, you know, promoting social interactions. You know, you're very welcome back. God, you know, we've missed having you in over the last 18 months. It's that sort of thing. It's getting people to feel that, you know, that their service has been missed. You know, we're dealing with some groups that 18 months ago, maybe the people who had been leading the group for 20 years stepped back to cocoon, and maybe younger people came in and took up that mantle, and you know, the older people seen that the group could carry on without them. So, you know, maybe they don't have that motivation to come back. Whereas if you had asked them 2 years ago, they would tell you that the bingo couldn't go on without them, or that the service or the facility couldn't manage without them. They've seen maybe that it can. So it's important now that they have that opportunity just to be told that they're valued and that they're part of it. You know, working with small groups, the video calls, trial shifts, getting people in to test and see. So, rather than if somebody is an out and out no, then you have to accept that. But if somebody's wavering, to come up with strategies that will enable them to come in and participate and get that level of comfort. And like Kevin's example there was around, getting people in via Zoom and in person. And slowly over time, the numbers on Zoom would hopefully lessen and the numbers in the room when restrictions allow will increase so that services start to get back to that kind of normal piece. Developing a buddy or a bubble system. So people knowing that, on Tuesday afternoons, they're going to be volunteering and it's going to be with these 2 or 3 people. And maybe those are people that they've already had interaction with or that they currently would socialize with. So they feel that level of comfort, that it's not some stranger maybe coming into them that they're not familiar with or that they don't necessarily know. So those are just some of the ideas, I suppose, that we had around kind of interacting with that. Now the slide you've all been waiting for it, and it's not going to clarify a lot for you, is around volunteers and vaccination. So we weren't sure about this ourselves, and we contacted Volunteer Ireland, who would be our sort of parent body, just to get their advice on how this works. And they weren't 100% sure either. So they contacted the HSE and they spoke to some legal people, and they came back to us with this advice that we don't have the right to ask if somebody has been vaccinated. It's the same as an employment situation. Most people, I suppose, are going to tell you, that they've been vaccinated. Most people probably don't have an issue. But if people aren't forthcoming with that information, I suppose, we can't overtly say, look, tell us, show us the cert, or you're out of here. We can't store vaccine status information. You'll see it even in pubs and restaurants. They're not actually storing that information. They might be storing the contact tracing for X amount of days as a log of people coming in, but they're not storing your personal data. We can't discriminate on vaccine status, and that is purely because they're not mandatory. It's a personal choice. There's 300,000 adults that have chosen in the country not to get vaccinated, which is roughly about 10% of the adult population. That, is their choice. They're doing it for their own reasons, and, it's kind of gone on from there. I suppose really to come around that, you need to conduct a risk assessment regarding clients, volunteers and staff. And we have some information on the likes of doing a risk assessment and how to do that, how to do the COVID cleaning protocols, all of those other things. And, you have to just, I suppose, work on that assumption. And it says it there in the last line of it, it's best to assume that no one is vaccinated and plan accordingly, because ultimately, even with vaccination, people are still being hospitalized and still are getting very ill. Possibly, I suppose, the death numbers are well down, but there's still a lot of illness and a lot of disease circulating within the community. So there isn't a right to volunteer. So you can decide, that somebody isn't going to be volunteering with your organization. You just, I suppose, there is the right to do that. It's not, it's not got the employment or the rights of employment or any of those things. Volunteering is, I suppose, a privilege and favor. It's kind of a more casual relationships. And, it's all about doing what you can and very overtly and visibly doing what you can to keep volunteers, staff and service users safe. It's being visible and that being evident. And as I've stated already, it's best to assume that nobody is vaccinated and work off that basis. That, I would say, if 100 people come into your service, most of them will probably tell you at the door, I have a mask on and I'm vaccinated, that's fine. But, it is a personal choice for people to decide what it is they're doing. And I suppose a little bit then about what the Volunteer Centre can do to help. So I suppose, look, we can offer supports around re-engagement. We can have one-to-one chats with groups that are maybe struggling to get their volunteers in to help them with these things. We can look at, recruitment of volunteers, and we never promise that we're able to get volunteers. We just promise that we will try. We can help you look at vetting in Garda and much wider than that, around kind of, I suppose, the volunteer recruitment piece. We can help you around, policies. If you need a COVID-19 policy, or you need a new policy on restricted volunteering or virtual volunteering or something like that, chat to the likes of ourselves, and we'll go looking for it if we don't have it. We do a lot around volunteer supports. We do, social elements of volunteering. We do a lot of training. We act as an agent for signposting, so we help direct people to other services that might be the ones that they need. So, if you are struggling with anything, or anything is coming up as a concern, shoot us in an email or give us a call, have a chat with ourselves. And if we're not in a position to be able to advise or help, we look for a route to do that for you. So the volunteer itself, we always do our bit about promoting ourselves. And look, from our perspective, I suppose the reason that we are successful in what we do is that, we have a very experienced staff. We've been doing this work for a very long time. We feel that the groups trust us, that, we'll do our best for them. That we do a lot out and about through the county. We try to be visible across the county, and we try to kind of be within the community that we're supporting. That we try to promote volunteering and promote it, doing it in a safe, responsible way, and to have the measurements and the protocols around it to help people to do that better. So look, you all have our contact details, otherwise you wouldn't be here. So I'll unshare now. And look, is there anything, any questions or any thoughts or anything you would have around, I suppose, the information that was presented? Are we missing the point? Are we hitting the point? What do you think yourselves?
Hi, John.
Hi, Patrick.
Yeah, no, look, I really enjoyed that, John. Really informative. And I suppose just from our own